Welcome to our podcast on emerging markets. I'm Andy Murray, the Executive Director of the Major Projects Association. I'm joined by our chair and two of our panelists from our seminar last month. And just a quick summary, the seminar was exploring some of the emerging markets that sort of underpin the UK's net zero energy transition. And we're looking at both the risks and opportunities. And we put a spotlight on three aspects of that. So one was around the role of new nuclear. We did a spotlight on hydrogen, and we also did a spotlight on international interconnectors and generator projects. As I said, we're joined by our chair and two of our speakers from that session. So please welcome Stephen Beattie, the Global Head of Infrastructure and Head of Global Cities Centre of Excellence for KPMG International. Welcome, Stephen.
Hello, it's good to be here.
Great, and thank you for joining us again. And we've got Dr. Zeynep Kurban, Technical Director of Future Energy at GHD. Welcome, Zeynep.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Sam Mercer, Senior Programme and Commercial Manager for HVDC Transmission at Xlink.
I was going to say afternoon, but it could be morning or evening. Hey there.
Yeah. Depending on time of day when people listen to this podcast. So absolutely. So we also had to kick us off, apart from Stephen's excellent introduction, gave that sort of macro view of sort of different geographies and different technologies that was influencing emerging markets. We also had a short talk from the National Infrastructure Commission in sort of reflecting on some findings from their second National Infrastructure Assessment, where they're taking that long-term view. And one of the things that came from that was not necessarily the changing balance between perhaps whether it's transport or telecoms or energy infrastructure, but actually it was the need for adaptability in terms of responding to changes, for example, the pandemic and other sort of socio-economic trends that will dictate different types of infrastructure and the different ways in which it's used. So that was a fascinating sort of introduction. And then we had our two spotlights. One of the other sectors we looked at was around international interconnectors and generator projects. And we had Sam Mercer from the Xlinks project. So, Sam, can you just give us a bit of background to the project? Because it's quite audacious, really, in what you're trying to achieve. So just give us some a headline and some of the facts and figures for your project. I think everyone will find it really fascinating.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Andy. So yeah, exciting is the word I would use, but on a not just a major, but a mega scale. So interconnectors are typically direct current cables that run under the sea to connect one transmission system, one electricity transmission system to another, and are able to send power in either direction. The DC allows you to send it in either direction. For us, on our Morocco UK power project that Xlink is currently developing, it's really a one-way system to harness the solar and the wind that will generate in an enormous generation park in Morocco, in the south of Morocco, and send it through two pairs, so a total of 4 cables, over a 3,800 kilometre route into Devon, into Alberdiscot, and they power up 3.6 gigawatts, which really equates to about we're expecting about 7 million homes, or 8% of the national requirement for the UK. So a project again on a really mega scale with solar, wind and battery power to help level off obviously fluctuations day and night, and when the wind powers on and powers off, but a direct current transmission system to bring all of that lovely clean energy into the UK and help balance out the demands that we have here. So yeah, exciting is the word.
Yeah, and one of the things that I was fascinated by it is, well, apart from some of the figures you gave there, around sort of 8% of sort of UK's energy needs. So that's comparable to Hinkley. And when a scheme comes on like this, and that's that influences, other projects which may or may not go ahead in terms of providing the energy that the UK requires. But one of the things you mentioned in your talk, though, was around that sort of nearly 4,000 kilometres of cable that needs to be laid. That's a lot of cable, not just in terms of the manufacture, but also of the cable laying, and that's a new market in itself, isn't it? In terms of the fleets that's needed to do that and the capacity to generate the cable that you need.
Yeah, I mean, I think the emerging market banner fits in multiple ways. So, long distance interconnectors will be one of the first. The longest one so far is about 720 route kilometers connecting Norway to Northumbria. There's another one in progress across to Denmark, but this is 4 times the length. So, as an emerging market, an ultra long distance or a super long distance, clearly there's interconnectors on overhead lines across China, across India, so across Africa. Those are long mega projects in themselves, but on overhead lines rather than cables. So subsea cables, ultra long distance in an emerging market, and with that comes, as you rightly acknowledge, you've got to make the cable, and then you have to put the cable on the seabed with a fleet of vessels, which includes burying the cable and protecting it as well. So capacity and growth for factory vessels, protection, all of the engineering support that goes with it, all the people. It's definitely a growth market, an emerging market.
And Xlink as an organisation, is that something that you're developing that capability yourself, or you're working with the market and supply chain? Are you sort of seeding that capability elsewhere? How do you anticipate that capability or that capacity coming on stream?
So Xlinks, it's a bit of a mix, if I'm honest, because clearly you need to bring experience on whilst you develop inexperience, as it were. But we've got a bit of a varied team in terms of that capability or knowledge or experience, but we're supplemented currently in the development phase by a whole bunch of consultants that are expert advisors and as you'd expect on a scheme of this nature, some very specialist topics and some very detailed technical advice that we need to make sure that the whole thing works, and the interconnector, the generation park, everything sits together and sends power seamlessly. So it's a mix, if I'm honest. And then as you also move forward to the construction phase, again, there's a huge supply chain that will be involved. Typically, you understand all the civils, construction, building roads and overhead lines and cables and converter stations and the like. But there's all that engineering and knowledge, and the content in Morocco is a really exciting part of the project as well. So the development I guess markets in multiple senses.
Yeah, and the other thing that I found fascinating is because it's a new type of interconnector with the generation linked to it, that sort of the regulator in terms of it isn't quite, or the regulations aren't quite in place yet. So it's not just emerging in terms of that capability, capacity to deliver it, but also to create that market for the demand side of it as well.
It's a sort of a yes and a no. I mean, the regulation and the mechanisms that we're seeking support for from the government exist. The contract for difference is a well-trodden path, but it's something that we need to give confidence and certainty to investors and other stakeholders and the supply chain itself. I mean, it's all a bit of a virtuous circle, if I'm honest. You put certainty at the centre. There's a triangle of interaction between managing risk and managing supply chain and managing external stakeholders. All comes together. So I think the regulation needs perhaps a little bit of work, but ultimately we know that there's a mechanism there that will support us. We just need to make sure that everyone agrees it's the right thing to do, and clearly we believe it's the right thing to do to bring clean energy through to the UK.
Brilliant. So, Stephen, I wonder if you've got some reflections on what you learned on the day from the Xlinks programme.
From my perspective, it's interesting because this is a project that deals with lots of technology, lots of supply chain, but to me, perhaps the biggest challenge and the biggest potential constraining factor in any of these new markets is the human factor. And how do we make sure we have enough people trained up to do all the relevant bits in the right order? And the human factors, I think it's something that I'm not sure I appreciated well enough earlier in my career, but certainly now it really seems to be something that we've got to be spending more time and more cycles of brain power on. It seems to be back to the virtuous circle. The virtuous circle needs to actually be fully squared so that we can do it. And I think that's going to remain a continuing challenge, both for project sponsor as well as the firms doing the actual work, as well as government and the public sector, to make sure that the right, if you will, human capital raw materials are ready, willing, and able to act and perform when they are called on.
Yes, so Sam, in terms of we've been focusing on the cable, the interconnector part, but obviously in Morocco, those human factors include a workforce that's going to be required to operate, the facilities once they're developed. So it's creating a new workforce, so to speak. Yeah,
I mean, part of the beauty of the project is it will create a lot of jobs, but you need the people to fulfill them. I totally echo what Stephen's saying, really. So, actually in the operational phase, not relatively smaller team to manage the operations, but construction wise, there's a lot of roles to fill. So I agree, the human factor and getting the right experience and capability, and at the same time bringing on new learning and new knowledge, and you're just saying it's another emerging market, isn't it? So how do you grow those?
Can I jump in just on one more question? How much at full throttle, how much of the world's supply of cable laying equipment, call those, let's focus on ships. How much of the world's cable laying ship capacity are you going to be occupying? And how many ships does that mean we have to build in order for everything else that's contemplated to get done?
Clearly, if this is an emerging market, and we believe that we need to build our own vessels and push forward in that respect, the demand for other vessels for other projects, that's out there as well. So I, if I'm honest, I'm not sure about the total future growth prediction, but it'd be interesting to see what those demands do require. Sorry, that's a bit of a flaky answer. You might edit that.
I think it's a perfectly honest answer, and I think that's exactly one of the challenges, because some of the lead times, not only on the people, but the lead times on the physical assets are really quite substantial, and we've really got to make sure we give it enough time and we give it enough consideration how early we need to begin some of these things.
Yeah, and it's not in isolation. So as other schemes come on board, you've got competing demands for those facilities elsewhere. So Zeynep, I think you want to come in on this point or this last question.
The previous question, actually. So I think the point that Stephen's raising on this human capital and resourcing issue is a really important one. And I think given that our energy economy is currently built on fossil fuels, there's a major role for the fossil fuel industry to play in kind of transitioning the roles within the sector to new technologies and future energy, especially hydrogen, given that there are quite a few similarities in the way hydrogen gas or liquefied hydrogen can be transported in a similar fashion to natural gas and LNG. But unfortunately, the work being done by the fossil fuel sector is not enough, to say the least. Their investments are less than 5% of their revenue in renewables. So I think that's a sector that could play a major role and needs to do more than it's been doing. or planning to do, in fact.
And it's a fantastic segue, Zeynep, to the spotlight on hydrogen. You gave us an overview of the market, and I was blown away by the scale of it. So perhaps for those who were unable to attend the seminar, could you just give us a recap as to what is going on in the world of hydrogen at the moment?
Yes, sure. It's worth noting that this decade is probably the decade for the emergence of a hydrogen economy, given that there has been several hype cycles in the past, and I'd say we are entering a more the phase of realism, and hopefully more projects will be built on the ground to make this happen. And in terms of the projects, there are currently about 1,000 projects that have been announced around the world, with investments amounting to about 320 billion US dollars. And of these projects, about 75% need to be built by 2030. A lot of this investment is in the EU, about 35%, and about 15% from America, and another 15% from Asia Pacific region. However, it's worth noting that only 10% of these projects have reached final investment decisions, so we have a long way to go still. Some of the kind of major barriers to unlocking that investment is policy certainty in most regions, especially in terms of unlocking private sector investment. A lot of these investors are looking to better understand the kind of revenue streams that could be enabled for hydrogen going forward, given that there isn't demand yet material in many of these countries. So, I mean, I would say, hydrogen, the reason it's taken so long to get here is because it's such a complex area to tackle, given that there isn't an existing infrastructure as there is for the electricity transmission and distribution systems. So it's that chicken and egg problem that has hampered progress for so many years. The infrastructure investments are major, and as a result, that's without that being there, a lot of the off-takers are not changing their processes because they want to make sure they have security of supply of hydrogen at low enough cost. And yeah, the question some of these companies are also looking at, and in fact countries, is also where the hydrogen will come from. Europe is positioned to focus on green hydrogen production from renewables, given that they just want to move away from fossil fuels. Essentially, that's their main reason. But most of the world is really looking at different options for obtaining hydrogen, including from natural gas combined with CCS. And there's a bit of uncertainty in some of the countries on the prospects for CCUS as well. So in the UK, however, there's been a lot of support, 20 billion pounds announced for developing CCUS clusters, which would help hydrogen. But I just wish there was as much funding, at least half, would be absolutely amazing for the hydrogen sector, because the UK is really falling behind in terms of both government and private sector investments in this space.
One of the things that sort of struck me, you talked about that, 1,000 projects have been announced, 75% by 2030, 10% reaching that investment decision. So that means there's something like 650 projects globally that are going to be delivered in the next 7 years. That's a massive ramping up, particularly as you say, we come off the end of that hype cycle into a delivery cycle. So I think from an impact, a market impact for us is, we've heard from Sam in terms of the scaling up on the on the cable side, cable laying side of things. There's going to be an equivalent, isn't there, in for the hydrogen market as it matures. I've got a question for you though. You said about the UK falling behind, and in your talk you mentioned that the sort of hydrogen capacity in the US is growing 1.5 times faster, or sorry, in North America than the rest of the world. Why is that? What's enabled that in the US, or in North America rather?
On the first note, before I answer that question, it's worth noting when the renewable sector was being developed, I say being developed, it's still being developed. However, in terms of the investments before the costs were really lowered, I think only about 20% of the projects that were actually planned for went ahead. So it's worth noting that not all of these projects will get FID, and it's really going to depend on and there's a major competition to make them happen, and that includes resources, going back to the previous point. So in terms of the UK, I should be careful when I say falling behind. We are not yet. However, there is this possibility that we could. The UK has a very strong supply chain base to develop the hydrogen sector. We have one of the biggest electrolyzer manufacturing companies, and it's very strong innovation space, R&D space, that enabled this to happen in terms of the commercialization of the technologies. So we have that know-how, and we've got that momentum, and so many projects, up to 20 gigawatts of projects, twice that planned by 2030, which is double the government's target for hydrogen production. But we are at this risk of falling behind, given that we have very little government funding and also somewhat policy uncertainty, which some other countries are doing better in terms of kind of enabling that policy certainty and incentive. The Inflation Reduction Act in the US has been quite critical in terms of providing revenue support and tax credits in addition to that to drive the sector. And in fact, a lot of GHD's clients and the people who are looking at developing hydrogen projects are expressing interest in doing them in the US because of these incentives. And so this will then drive a push in resources and skills to the US, because there is a global competition, as Stephen pointed out, and we could then fall behind.
Great, thanks, Zeynep. Stephen, do you want to add your thoughts?
My biggest issue here is we're still struggling with this lack of understanding just how close 2030 is. And we're in that stage, and it's interesting because I'm watching the US go through this, and that they're still searching for perfection, and perfection has become the enemy of progress. And as we do this, again, plans, when you're doing a plan, the plans always come true. And the trick is, it's just over 6 years to 2030. Some of the development schedules will really begin to bite, and our ability to achieve what is possible on paper will be harder when it comes to actually putting boots on the ground, technology in the ground. And I think that's going to be one of the big challenges. I'm not sure it's actually struck home yet just how close 2030 is and how much needs to be done. The time for action is now. The time for action is not 2 years from now. The time for action is now. That's at the human capital stage, it's at the technology stage, it's at the finance stage. And remember, the lenders in these projects develop very short arms and very deep pockets when they have that policy uncertainty. And I think, again, I would call strongly on governments, and we're seeing the implication of that with the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, where that does cause the capital, cause projects, cause technology to flow to a jurisdiction. So I think there's some real uncertainty here, and I think I just hope the sense of urgency is making it all the way to the decision makers.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, we could see that sort of the international aspect affecting here in terms of acts or policies in one jurisdiction, creating or moving demand and therefore attracting supply, and how that sort of affects our markets. And we've seen this in other aspects of major projects. Certainly, the increase in capital projects in Saudi Arabia, for example, we know that there's been a draw of our design engineers and so on, moving to work on projects there, affecting their availability for projects in the UK. So yes, interesting times, and we're seeing the competition for the investments and the human capital, as you're saying, by different nations. Stephen, I wonder if I could sort of come back to you again. In terms of, you chaired our event on emerging markets. We looked at three, just spotlight on three in those relating to the energy transition. Just again, for the benefit of those who didn't attend the seminar, just thought if you could give your thoughts in terms of, what is the outlook from a major project in terms of opportunities and those threats in terms of emerging markets going forward?
I think our ambition is great. Our ability to deliver is not without its challenges, whether that be at the human factors level, whether that be at the supply chain level, and when I say supply chain, I'll go so far as to say the lenders on projects. I think the real challenge for all of us is this need for this sense of urgency. And it's hard to translate that into boots on the ground, but we have to do it. Just try and hire an urban planner today. That urban planner's probably got 5 job offers from 5 different places in the world, all of whom could be a good 10-year portion of someone's career. So I think the competition for resources is massive. I think failing to acknowledge that may be the Achilles heel of many programs. And everyone is going, one of the things and I'll take the Inflation Reduction Act as an example, the challenges that in America, for the longest time, nobody gets it, nobody gets it, nobody gets it, nobody gets it. And then all of a sudden, everybody gets it at the same time. And it goes from zero to art form to craft to mass production in a matter of almost weeks. And when that happens, watch out. I think the global markets, for the last, call it, dozen years, the greatest investment you could make would be to buy on a private equity basis another company that already exists that didn't have access to capital or didn't have access to a transition of ownership from one generation to another. That phenomenon, while it will continue to exist, will need to confront climate, and in particular investments in new technologies. There are new uncertainties, different things that we need to be aware of. But I think if we proceed down this road, we're going to need to spend quite a lot of time in investing in the financiers and helping them come to terms, just as they came to terms with generational issues and access to capital issues in the past decade. They're going to need to come to that if we are going to be able to achieve what we hope to achieve with respect to global warming. Interestingly, some of the largest private equity entities in the world have acknowledged this. And the challenge is, how do we create the expertise both in the investor and in the developer implementer at the same time? The great challenge to me is making sure we get our regulatory system well enough advanced so that we can give that policy certainty to everyone. And I think if we do that, 2030 is a reasonable goal. Are people openly talking about not making 2030? Absolutely. Are people really talking about 2050? I think they are. It's a little scary. I don't want to accept defeat because I don't think defeat is assured, but I do think we really need to get started if we're to make a meaningful dent in the commitments that everyone has made to 2030. So optimistic, absolutely. Is the demand there? Absolutely. Will we really have to move forward human factors, supply chain, access to capital, absolutely real challenges, and none of them is an easy solve.
Yes, we need a lot more projects of the like that we heard on our seminar. So I'm going to have a last chance then for Sam and Zeynep to make a pitch for if we get that regulatory and policy certainty, why should the best investment and the best human capital and organizations be attracted to work in the international interconnectors and generators, Sam?
Well, I mean, yeah, I use the word exciting, and I use the word clean energy, and it is really transformational. So, quite as you said, what was your word? An aspirational company, really kind of leading the charge, and just a great, exciting place to be. So, yeah, that would be my pitch. All of those 4 words.
Great, thanks, Sam. And Zeynep, same question to you.
Yeah, I think clean energy is moving fast, but unfortunately not fast enough, especially if we're going to meet our net zero targets. We're not going to meet our target to stay within the 1.5 degrees heating limit. Unfortunately, that's how it seems. But the faster we can act to minimize the damage, the better. And policymakers really need to internalize this and take the necessary action.
Thanks, Zeynep. And in terms of time, taking time to action, we're out of time. So I'd just like to thank Stephen, Zeynep and Sam for joining us for this podcast and providing us some additional insights and some extra detail on the information you shared with us at the seminar. So thank you very much. And thank you for everyone listening to this podcast, and see you again on the next one.